The lumen flickers again. I taste metal in the recycled air, that copper tang that means the filters have stopped lying. My fingers still tremble from the last transmission attempt. Static, nothing but the hollow scream of the void echoing back. We are alone. The astropathic choir is silent, their chambers sealed since the day the last of them burned from the inside out, their skulls splitting like overripe fruit as the warp turned away. They said the Emperor's light could never fade from the loyal, but the corridors of this world hum with a different truth now. The Astronomicon has abandoned us, and the stars themselves have gone blind. If any still hear this through the dust of our failing vox, record the words of the last scribe of Vardos Secundus. If the signal carries through the dark, then let the Emperor himself bear witness to our endurance. The lumen hum had become part of my heartbeat long before the silence began. Each pulse of light shimmered down the corridor like breath exhaled through dying lungs. The air was thick with that faint metallic tang again. Iron and ozone, the taste of failing circuits and fear. I remember pressing my palm against the Vox relay plate, feeling its warmth fade under my touch, like the cooling skin of something once alive. The astropathic sanctum had been sealed for 3 days now, its warding sigils flaking under their own age, and no one dared open the doors. Even the custodian of records, a man of iron habit and empty eyes, muttered his prayers more often than he wrote them. We had known something was wrong long before anyone admitted it. The dreams were the first sign. The choir had begun to scream in their sleep. One voice at first, then hundreds joined in unison until their cries became background noise to the hive's insomnia. When I stood near their chamber doors, I could feel the vibration through the stone, a sound like knives dragged over glass inside my skull. They said the Astronomicon had flared too bright, that the Emperor's radiance had burned them from within, but that was a comforting lie. I saw the aftermath myself. Their bodies were still upright, fused into the throne nodes by melted neural jacks. Their faces were frozen in ecstasy or terror. Sometimes I think those words mean the same thing. The silence that followed was worse. No choir song, no distant psychic murmur, only the void pressing inward like a physical weight. The Vox officers kept trying to reach orbit, then segmentum command, then anyone at all. Nothing came back. Not even static, only that perfect devouring quiet. The administratum clerks continued stamping requisitions, insisting on protocol. Disruption in transmission relays, they called it. But you cannot bureaucratize the dark. The black between stars doesn't respect ink. I was assigned to record the events for the Archivum's Chronicle, part of the usual redundancies, a precaution against data corruption. I had copied thousands of liturgies before without thought, but when the Vox died, the data slates began to fail too. The cogitators stuttered, repeating fragments of text like half-remembered prayers. The Emperor protects, the Emperor protects, the Emperor, until even the machine seemed to lose faith in its own message. It was then I began to keep my own notes by hand, ink, paper, symbols no machine could overwrite, the way the ancients did when they feared the future would forget them. The first day without signal passed quietly, if uneasily. The second brought food rationing. By the third, the smell of decay from the choir's wing drifted through the ventilation shafts. The Medicae refused to enter. The ecclesiarchy sent acolytes with censers, chanting over the vents as if incense could drown out the stench of psychic death. I kept writing, though I no longer knew for whom. A chronicler without an audience feels like a ghost rehearsing its own funeral oration. When the breakdown finally began, it was not with an explosion or uprising, but with laughter. A single adept in the Vox chamber began giggling mid-sentence during his shift. At first I thought he had lost his wits from exhaustion, but the laughter grew louder, higher, distorted, until his throat tore open and blood sprayed over the cogitator bank. His eyes were glowing with that same green light that had flared from the choir pits. We burned the body before the Mechanicus could claim it for analysis. The Magos protested naturally, citing violation of data integrity protocols. But no one wanted to see what the laughter meant. That night I dreamt of the Astronomicon, not the radiant flame of imperial faith described in Catechism, but a cold sun, shrinking, pulsing like a wounded heart. Its light reached me through oceans of static, and when it touched my face I tasted metal again, so sharp it made me bleed. I woke with blood on my tongue and the Vox buzzing faintly in the corner, whispering a single phrase in a voice that wasn't mine. The light remembers. No one else heard it, or so they claimed. But by the next morning, the Vox grid had gone completely dark. The only sound left was the hum of the lumens and the steady, mechanical heartbeat of the city trying to pretend it was still alive. I walked the upper transit halls that day, watching the smoke curl from distant manufactorum stacks. The sky was the color of old parchment, the sun a dying ember behind pollution haze. The world looked as tired as we felt. I remember passing a mural of the Emperor, golden, triumphant, surrounded by his angels, and realizing how chipped the paint had become. Beneath the flaking gold leaf, rust bloomed like rot through holy metal. I wanted to scrape it away to restore his radiance, but my hand stopped inches from the surface. Some part of me understood that the rot wasn't just in the wall. That night the sirens began. They said it was a reactor breach in the lower habs, but everyone knew the truth before it was spoken. Something had stirred beneath the choir's wing. The silence wasn't empty after all. It had only been waiting for us to listen closely enough. The lumen hum grew louder, and beneath it I could almost hear breathing. The first bodies surfaced at dawn, not the astropaths. Those had long since ceased to be anything one could call human, but the men and women sent to clean their sanctum. They were found in the corridor outside, curled into positions of prayer, hands clasped tight enough to fuse flesh to bone. No one could explain how their lungs had filled with ash when there'd been no fire. The Medicae wrapped them in cloth stamped with the imperial aquila and dumped them in the furnace vaults without liturgy. There weren't enough priests left willing to bless what might be contagious. After that, the Vauxhalls were placed under the command of Captain Harn of the Planetary Defense Forces. He was a tall, raw-boned man with eyes like flint chips, once loyal to every syllable of the creed, but after the choir's death, faith had calcified into command protocol. I still see him standing on the command dais framed by red emergency lumens, dictating casualty numbers in a voice stripped of emotion. All transmissions suspended. All signals quarantined. All unauthorized Vox contact punishable by immediate sanction. The decree echoed through the hive like scripture, rewritten by an executioner. By the 7th day, the hive city had begun to eat itself from within. Administratum clerks argued over supply ledgers as if ration stamps could substitute for divine order. The lower habs rioted when food shipments ceased, and the Arbites sealed entire levels under pretext of quarantine. Those of us in the upper strata pretended the thunder below was merely distant machinery. But the truth seeped upward, through smoke vents, through rumor, through the smell. Promethium and blood carry far when the air circulators fail. My duties changed without anyone telling me so. Once I had chronicled victories, troop deployments, manufactorum outputs, even triumphal processions for governors long dead. Now I recorded collapse line by line in a ledger that would never be filed. I wrote by candlelight while the lumen grid flickered and the cogitators clicked out error sigils. The ink bled into the parchment until every word looked like a wound. Sometimes, when the silence deepened, I fancied I could hear the scratch of my quill echoing back from somewhere behind me, as if another scribe, invisible, were copying my words in perfect unison. It was on the 9th day that I saw the first warp light flicker across the sky. A filament of pale green shimmered above the hive towers, twisting like a vein pulsing through the heavens. The air crackled with static, and for a heartbeat, I thought I could hear voices speaking from it, thousands overlapping, whispering the same phrase the Vox had spoken to me. The light remembers. Then the filament winked out, leaving only darkness and the metallic taste in the air. The adepts called it atmospheric ionization. The priest called it a sign. I called it fear-given shape. Captain Harn summoned me that evening. He had read some of my private notes. I still don't know how, and demanded I cease recording unverified phenomena. His words, not mine. I told him that the truth did not require verification, only witness. He didn't appreciate the distinction. If you record hysteria, he said, you feed hysteria. His hand lingered on the holster at his belt. Do you understand, scribe? I nodded, but the moment I returned to my cell, I wrote every word down. Some things deserve to be remembered, even when remembrance becomes a crime. That night, power failed across the upper hive. I woke to darkness so complete it felt physical, pressing against my eyes. Then came the sound, a low, resonant thrum rising from deep below, pulsing in rhythm with the lumen hum. Except the lumens were dead. I followed it through the corridors, guided only by the faint phosphor glow of emergency runes, down past the Vox chambers, past the storage vaults where the dead had been stacked like cargo, until I reached the sealed gates of the choir sanctum. The door's sigils still burned faintly in red Mechanicus glyphs, warnings etched by magos who likely no longer lived. Yet I felt the vibration through the metal, steady, deliberate, almost breathing. I pressed my ear against the cold surface and heard a whisper. Not words exactly, more like the ghost of a phrase half remembered from childhood catechisms. Then something answered from the other side. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. By dawn the sound had stopped, but the smell had worsened, sweet and rotting, like burnt incense soaked in blood. The Mechanicus sealed off the entire level and posted Skitarii sentries at every junction. None spoke. Their red lenses tracked movement with inhuman patience, and I realized they too were afraid. Though their fear had been welded into obedience. One of them, a sergeant by the serial tag on his armor, turned his head as I passed and whispered in Binharik, the words almost too fast to parse. The code is corrupted. The song is wrong. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. The next night, the Vox relays came alive again. Not with messages, no coordinates, no Imperial traffic, but with sound. A single tone, pure and piercing, spreading through every channel at once. It was the same pitch the choir used to begin their transmissions, a psychic key meant to align mortal minds with the Emperor's voice. Only now it was raw, distorted, and wrong. People clutched their heads and screamed as the sound drilled into their skulls. Cogitators caught fire. The Vox operators burst vessels behind their eyes. I remember collapsing to the floor, blood streaming from my nose, the tone reverberating through my bones. And then, silence again. Perfect, total silence. When I awoke, the Vox tower was gone. Not destroyed, not collapsed, simply gone as if erased. Only a crater remained, glowing faintly with green light. Captain Harn's forces cordoned off the site, but the Skitarii refused to approach it. The ground there was soft, rippling slightly when touched, like skin stretched over something moving beneath. That was the moment we stopped pretending this was a failure of machinery. The Emperor's light had not only left us, it had been replaced by something that remembered its shape, but not its mercy. The lumen hum returned that night, louder than ever. But this time I realized it wasn't the hum of light. It was the world itself, vibrating with the memory of the choir's last scream. By the time the second sunshift chimed, the crater had drawn pilgrims. They came in hushed lines from the lower habs, rag-wrapped, soot-faced, carrying scraps of parchment or dented aquila pendants like talismans against drowning. The Arbits tried to beat them back with shock mauls, but the crowd returned after each dispersal, pulled by the glow as tides are pulled by moons. I watched from the gallery level as one woman crawled past the cordon on her knees, palms upturned, eyes closed. She whispered in a child's voice, "Father, hear me," and reached toward the soft, rippling earth. Her hand sank into the wrist. She didn't scream. She smiled. When they dragged her away, her skin was imprinted with delicate lines as if a cogitator lattice had pressed a blessing into flesh. The marks bled green for an hour, then faded to ordinary bruises. In the ledger I wrote, "An answer has shape but not language." Then I crossed the sentence out and wrote it again. Captain Harn ordered the crater sealed with plasteel sheets and posted double watches. The Skitarii held the perimeter, expressionless behind their vox grills while their auger nodes clicked like insects tasting the air. I asked the sergeant with the Binharic whisper if the Mechanicus had an interpretation. He said nothing for so long I thought my question had been fed into a processor and forgotten. Then, half a syllable, a static rasp. Echo. I remember the way his red lenses brightened on the word, as if the thought pained him. I returned to my cell to find my door already open. The custodian of records waited at my desk, hands folded atop my ledger. He did not scold me for leaving it unsecured. He only turned a page with the care of a man handling reliquaries and said almost gently, "Your entries contradict sanctioned reports." "So do the dead," I said, before I could think to be afraid. He lifted his eyes. "Scribe Marlan Isa," he said, my name precise as a stamp. And for the first time I understood that even in this fraying order, there were still lists, and I had been moved to a different column. We preserve truth by preserving the state. Choose the state. I tasted metal again, slow and patient, as if the air were reminding me that it too could kill. "If the state lies about the dark," I said, "we will stumble into it." He closed the ledger, not harshly, like a confession finished. "Your quill serves or it severs," he said. "If it severs, we break it." He left without taking the book, which frightened me more than confiscation would have. It meant the breaking would not be of tools. The power bled away early that night, as if the hive had grown tired of pretending at daylight. I wrapped my robe tighter and went walking, counting steps to measure courage. The corridors near the choir sanctum had been repainted with warning glyphs, fresh cog red over old devotional script, and for a long minute I stood beneath a sign that said in Mechanicus cant, "Process halted pending verification of sanctity." The word sanctity had been stenciled twice, the second time in a smaller hand, as if someone had come back to insist. I did not intend to break seals. I intended only to stand, to listen, to give shape to remembrance. Yet the hum drew me, a low summons through bone, and I found my palm resting against the sanctum gate again. Cold, then warmth blooming under my skin. Not alive like flesh, but like a machine brought to readiness. The metal shivered. For an instant, the taste on my tongue sharpened beyond copper to something bright, almost sweet, like the moment a tooth chips and blood floods the mouth. The whisper came back, clearer this time, punched through from the other side of the sealed world. The light remembers. I should have fled. Instead, I pressed my forehead to the gate and breathed in decay and incense until I was shaking. "Remember what?" I asked. And the question felt like a heresy I could not retract. A rhythm answered. 3 knocks. The same pattern as before, but quicker now, as if whatever was inside had learned my pulse and adjusted to meet it. Somewhere down the corridor, servo skulls stirred and bobbed like curious fish, their lenses dilating. I stepped back, nearly tripping over a sensor abandoned by some acolyte who had run before the smoke failed. The chain clinked, a small sound, but it echoed too long, stretched thin by the emptiness. The sanctum gate did not open. The knocking ceased. A hiss bled through the seams, and I thought of lungs filling with ash that had never burned. I went to the archivum sublevels to steady my hands, telling myself paper would be safer than metal. The scriptorium was lit by a single lumen rod. Its flicker paced to the tremor in my wrists, and the shelves leaned as if braced against a storm we could not feel. I pulled a data slate at random to distract myself. A shipment manifest from a decade ago, stamped and countersigned by names that meant nothing now. The figures repeated down the columns with the boredom of a prayer. Lacelles, protein bricks, Auspex lenses. At the bottom, a notation in a clerk's cramped hand, highlighted and then scratched out. Communications surcharge waived for exemplary choir output. The ink had pooled where the pen pressed too hard, as if the writer had been angry with joy. I did not hear footsteps, only a presence, like pressure equalizing in a sealed chamber. I looked up and found Captain Harn, haloed by the lumen's shiver. He smelled faintly of oil and ozone in the cold air of upper towers. "You risk contagion when you wander," he said. "What kind?" I asked. "Warp, panic, truth?" He didn't smile, but something like regret crossed his face, an expression I had not earned. "I was a boy when I first heard an astropath sing," he said. We toured the sanctum under guard. The sound made me weep. I told myself it was the Emperor touching my mind. The Magos told me it was harmonics aligning in cranial bone. Both could be true, I said, though my tongue wanted blood again. He reached past me, lifted my ledger, and weighed it in his hand as if measuring shot for a gun. "I cannot protect this," he said. "Or you." He set it down. "But I can give you an errand. Go to the crater at shift change. A Mechanicus envoy will meet you. They want a Civitas witness for a test." He paused, then added, "If I were a better officer, I would forbid it." "Why me?" I asked. "Because you will write what you see," he said, "even if it damns us."